Good afternoon.
Hey, Robbie.
Hey, Robbie.
Charles, the information we're looking at is the things you sent us today, right? This morning?
Yes.
Okay. Primarily, I guess. Okay.
Primarily. Yes. I should have sent it earlier, but I couldn't get that far.
I feel your pain, man.
Let's see. Hey, Bill.
Ross, how are you?
Just fine. How about you?
Good. Jonathan? Is that Brian Bond with the gray hair?
Yes, sir. How you doing, Bill?
Hey, I'm gray too. I'm doing fine.
You're going to have to give more specific descriptors than gray hair. That's a lot in that camp.
You're right.
Yeah, good to see you, Bill. How are you enjoying semi-retirement?
Semi good.
Good.
I got hauled back into the workforce. I guess my exclusive talents were much needed. Nothing to do with energy.
Oh, really? A lot of experience that would go to waste if you retired.
Absolutely right. Sure glad the governor recognized that.
Well, Jonathan and Bill, I think we have a couple people just joined, so we are over quorum. So I think we should go ahead and get started, and then as other folks come in, they can come in too. Do you mind calling us to order, Jonathan or Bill? I can't remember who said they would do it.
Take it away, Jonathan.
Jonathan, you're on mute still.
I don't know how that happened.
There you
I
go.
didn't mean to do that. All right, sorry. Good afternoon, everyone. We are here for the May 24th meeting of our committee of the Climate Task Force, the Power Production, Distribution, and Use Committee, and we'll call the meeting to order. Charles, if you have the list, if you could help with roll. Do you have it, Andy?
Yeah, I do. I'll call the roll. Jonathan Berg.
Here.
Bill Robertson.
Here.
Jeff Arnold. Logan Atkinson Burke.
Here.
Brian Bond.
Here.
Ethan Case. Dr. Terrence Chambers.
Here.
David Gary. Robbie Laborde.
Here.
Catherine King.
Here.
Simon Mahan.
Here.
Kim Tallis. Rob Verchick.
Here.
And Matt White. We are missing a few, but we have more than enough to have a full meeting here.
All right, great. Thanks, Charles. So I'll just go ahead and kick us off. I think, first of all, I want to thank everyone for pretty active participation over the last few months. And I think we'll go through them as we work through the today, but I think directed towards our committee is over 70 action items that we'll be looking through. Some of them overlap, and we'll talk about that. But I think a lot of those came through the work of the people on here today. So thanks for that. It was the submissions that I looked at were all very thorough and well thought out. So appreciate all the work there. And Bill, I didn't know if you had anything to add to that.
Oh, I just wanted to say I actually enjoyed reading the spreadsheet that the staff put together with all the different items that we're considering. Some great stuff in there that's going to bring our state forward. So yeah, back to you.
Very good. With that, we will move on to the approval of the minutes from our last meeting, which was on March 11th in 2021. Charles circulated those minutes this morning, and I'll take a motion to approve those minutes.
Motion to approve.
Thank you, Simon.
I'll second that.
Thanks, Bill. All in favor? Aye.
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 All right, I think those are approved. So we will move on to agenda item 5, which is to you, Charles, to take us through the presentation that you circulated this morning as well.
Yeah, okay. Well, thanks, everybody. And just to echo Jonathan and Bill, too, I just really do appreciate all the work that this committee put in over the past couple of months. We have a lot of stuff to go through, and I think that's reflective of how important this sector is, but also all the work you guys put in. So we really have just two things. I'm going to do a brief kind of context thing just so to remind you where we are in the overall process. And then we're going to spend most of the time kind of going through the actions that came in. I'm going to go through everything in super general at first, just so everybody can kind of see all the things on the table at once. And then we'll go through, kind of item by item or category by category at least, and kind of see what we can do there. So that's everything that we've got on this agenda for the rest of the day. So with that, I'll just jump in with some of the context slides. If my thing will advance, there we go. So today, the goal of the meeting today is to really give time for this committee one more time to discuss together the full body of actions that came in for our sector. We're going to be looking at things that you guys put together yourselves, that some of the advisory group members turned in, as well as the general public. From here on out, though, the actions kind of belong to me and my colleagues in the governor's office and the planning team. We're going to be kind of packaging these, presenting them to the task force, and kind of getting them ready to kind of go through the rest of this process that I'm gonna walk you through now. But we do want to kind of lean on your expertise one more time today in a kind of a bigger way, and then we'll be kind of touching back in down the road. So again, we're going to be taking notes kind of on ideas here, and basically we want to be able to hear about all the actions. We want to highlight anything that you guys think is particularly interesting or particularly good. Some of that obviously is denoted by you're turning in an action on it. But if there are things that came in from other places, other directions, or you wanted to highlight somebody else's, that would be great. And then again, to kind of provide advice to us on our side of the desk to figure out how do we organize these in a more effective way, or how do we, are there any gaps once you look at it from the zoomed out point of view that you want to look at, or just kind of direction to us on how to refine things further, maybe combine things, that sort of thing. So those are our goals for today. This slide is just a reminder about our overall process, right? So we're in number 3. This is kind of the main work of the sector committees in general, is this identifying alternative stage, which is this, action, what should we do stage. The sector committees, let's see, this is what we're working on. At the same time, this number 4 is what the advisory groups have been doing. And I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of what they've been up to, just so you can kind of see, but it's also going to help you understand what's going to happen to these actions that you've turned in going forward.
Hey, Charles,
Yes.
how much time did you budget for this meeting?
2.5. So we don't need to use all that, but if we need to, we can. But I appreciate anybody that can stay as long as they can stand to stay.
That takes us to 4 p.m.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. No problem. So again, as Jonathan mentioned, not only did this group get a lot of actions turned in, but there were almost 170 overall turned in by the public and our sector committee members, and it was just really great. We had the call out for 2 months, 169 actions, almost 70 were just for us, but a lot of these are cross-sector, and so some of these ideas that we put forward will be discussed in sector committees. Other sector committees, industry had a few, transportation, things like that, where there are natural overlaps. And kind of as we were putting things into buckets, we erred on the side of putting too many things in somebody's bucket instead of too few. And so you might see things that are like, well, we don't need to talk about. That's really for somebody else. That's kind of on purpose, and we can go faster over some of those if we want to. So anyway, just again, thank you for all this work. This is a really big accomplishment, I think. Finally, kind of, what are the advisory groups doing? And so they are, they've been working hard the past couple months too, on this number 4, right? Step 4, where we're forecasting the consequences. So we're going to be doing this in 2 rounds of consequence analysis. Each one is focused at a slightly different level of detail. The one we just are kind of rounding out, finishing up, is this kind of high level vision level. And then there's going to be another one at the practical action on the ground level. So we've been doing the high level first, partly because the actions were still in development. We did it concurrently as we were working on actions. So there weren't really detailed things to put in there, but we did have those strategies that you guys helped us come up with in our earlier meetings to kind of populate these portfolios. In the second round, we're going to kick the second round off in August, and that's when we're going to have the benefit of all these actions that have been turned in from the different committees. And in both rounds, it's important to know, I just want to say in both rounds, the portfolios, the whole idea there is to kind of evaluate them against all 18 fundamental objectives that we developed. This committee participated in kind of developing those objectives, so did the task force and the advisory groups, and everybody kind of laid out these really important objectives that we had. And it's more than just greenhouse gas emissions, right? It was other things like quality of life, equity, economy, environment, resilience, and short and long-term success. So all those things in both these rounds are being evaluated against multiple types of outcomes.
Charles, this is Catherine. I've got just a couple of questions. So that first round of the advisory groups, is some document going to make that public of what their findings
Yes,
are?
they had a deadline not too long ago to kind of turn in their kind of how they viewed these portfolios that I'm going to explain in just a second.
Okay.
And so we have, I think some of us have started to dig into those, but not all of us. I haven't even opened that email yet. And so we've got to get those, kind of reflect on those, and we will be putting that out for, as with everything, for review. And again, though, I think this will help a little bit. Just kind of the idea behind these initial high-level round of analysis was that to kind of purposefully turn dials up really far, or to kind of make them diverge, so that we could kind of see how far you could get with one set of strategies versus another. Kind of really kind of try to just just test out the whole process in general, but also get good feedback. So we want to again, these different portfolios that are on here. We had business as usual, right? And they're all full of assumptions. We know that we didn't get these all right. We just tried to take the strategies that we had identified, put them in these different portfolios, and then ask the advisory groups to kind of tell us what stands out to them. What are some of the limitations? What are some of the red flags or great things that would come out of it if we kind of went through these? And so, in addition to business as usual, we had an intensive electrification through zero carbon renewable energy one. We had a reduced energy demand, consumption, and waste. We had one on industrial carbon removal, capture, use, and storage, and another one where we kind of amped up the natural sequestration potentials and sinks on that. And so none of these ones that we kind of asked the advisory groups to look at the first time are going to become the strategy. But it is, again, just kind of understand the maximum benefits of doing one thing or another. And again, the second time around, it's going to be a lot more meaningful, I think, because of being able to look at the action level. And Logan, thanks for the hand. I don't see where you went, but I'm going to please unmute yourself if you're not. There you are. Hi.
Sure. Yeah. Hi. So that more sort of detail-oriented second round is when the real layers of economics and I guess scientific viability for various projects would come more into view, or is that also part of the first round?
Yeah, the first round did not get into as much detail. We wanted, if somebody had those kinds of insights, we wanted them, but we didn't expect them. A lot of things were saying like, we want to have all renewable power by this date, and then what would happen? And so we just said generally to the economy. And so a lot of the answers are it depends, right? So we had a lot of we weren't able to get a lot of finer details from the first round. The second round will be very different. I think we're going to have, not only are we going to have actions to deal with, we're going to have 2 full task force meetings before that officially starts too. So we'll have a lot of input and chance to kind of review what's going on. Colleen, I saw you joined. Do you want to add anything about that second round?
Sure. What I would add too about the first round is that the results from that will be presented to the task force in the June 8th meeting, which of course is public for everyone to watch as well. And then, yes, I think as you've mentioned, Charles, the second round will get into some of the finer details, but again, we'll be asking advisory group members to evaluate against those, fundamental objectives. I think there's 16 in total that they're looking at that include things like, short and long-term success, which asks some questions around, feasibility and timeline and economic impact. So it'll be evaluated against the same things that we identified were kind of important at the kick of this process.
Anybody else have a question? I hope we answered them, Catherine and Logan. Okay, thanks, y'all. So kind of where are we going from here? This is kind of like the overview slide. So again, what happens to these 169 actions that came in? So we've got, and how do we get from there to February when we have to have a final plan? So at the top left, all the submittals came in. They were due by April 30th. Especially for the public to know, they're all available online. I sent out a link to the committee members today. They're on the website that we've been using to post all the other meeting notices. And so if anybody wants to look at all of them, please check them out. They're unedited, unscreened. They're just up there for everybody to check out. We are then organized the proposals into the relevant sectors. And so that's kind of what made that 63, 68, whatever it is we have to look at today. We kind of did that initial organization so that the different sector committees can talk about the things that are most relevant to them. We will report out to the task force on June 8th, kind of all the action proposals in these different categories. And then looking as we move kind of around this corner to the right and then back to the bottom left-hand corner, we're going to be working, as I said, to kind of organize these actions, fill in any gaps, kind of combine some things after, based on the feedback from this meeting going forward. So that's the next step. And then these actions are going to be put back into portfolios where they're going to have strategies and actions and again be evaluated like we were just talking about. And then the action portfolios are going to be evaluated against the fundamental objectives. The sector committees are going to come back in September to have a chance to kind of see what the feedback was to some of those things from the advisory groups once they were in that more detailed phase. But we can, again, rely on your expertise to kind of tweak things to kind of make them better in any way we can. So that's in September. So you guys have a little bit of a break for the summer since you did so much work in the spring. And then we're going to be analyzing and discussing the trade-offs with the task force, kind of the final results from all those different evaluations, and then finally come to a decision about which strategies and actions are in the final report in the very end. So that's kind of our plan for the rest of the year. In terms of the calendar, it looks a little bit like this. We're here in late May. There will be a task force meeting in June. Where we again present all these actions. We're going to present the results from those portfolio evaluations. In July, we're going to be talking at a high level about priorities. We're also going to hear about the updated greenhouse gas inventory. In August, the advisory groups will start that second round of evaluation again. In September, we'll be able to come back and kind of see if there's anything we need to do based on kind of what their look at it. And then I think by September, we'll be largely done with sector committee meetings. And so then it will be kind of the focus will be shifting to more to the task force itself, where they'll be kind of reviewing the consequence analyses, talking about trade-offs, looking at draft reports, and then putting things out for final approval. Does anybody have any questions about anything else related to kind of process before we get into our stuff a little more?
Yes.
Please.
Charles, do you still have a desire to make a presentation before the Public Service Commission?
I would love to. I would love to figure out what that looks like. And I think that's one of the first questions I have for this group, because so many of the actions that you guys have suggested have to do with them, obviously, and then other entities that are not exactly, governor's office, legislature, right? There's this important other player. So yes, Bill, we can either, let's talk about that more during the open discussion and then figure out the details towards the end, or we can do that offline, what the best thing to do is there.
Well, I thought it was important for the committee to know we've been talking about that, and seeing your calendar here made me think it would be good for us to sort of brainstorm when that presentation would be most appropriate.
Completely agree. I think that sounds great. And just so everybody's aware, Brandon Fry with the Public Service Commission is on the legal advisory group. There might be one other person associated with them that's kind of in one of the other committees, but we've got some, they've been aware of kind of what we've been doing. And I know Bill's been our point of contact there as well, kind of throughout since the beginning. But especially now that we're kind of honing in on actual actions to take, it's time to kind of get involved with that group for sure. Any other questions? I would just mention too, Bill reminded me, something else that kind of came up that was relevant to this committee is the statewide energy plan that's been under development. And so that group is finally kicking off. They have contractors onboarded and they will be starting. Our office participated in a short kind of kickoff meeting last week with them. And so that process, I know people were wondering, how do those two things align? And we were working to align them, and they're just getting started. So we're still figuring out, again, with the calendar, how does our work best inform their work, and all that kind of stuff. So we are working on that. Yeah, Logan, do you have another question there?
Yeah, I'm just curious what that timeline looks like now for the state energy plan.
I should have had it with me. They did show us last week. I do not remember, but it's very close to this. I think there are a lot of chances for us to kind of plug in well. I think at one point we thought they were going to be ahead of us a little bit just because of the way the announcements were rolling out. But since they just have their contractors in place now, I think that it's better for the alignment purposes. But remind me or send me an email, Logan. I can find those dates and try to let you know.
Great. Thank you.
Yes. Okay. Well, I think it's time, if it's okay, if we could kind of get into the actual actions that got sent out to us. What I've done here is first, like I said, I would love to kind of go through at a super high level, just to quickly kind of run through kind of what we received and kind of how we've thought to organize them this first time. So you can kind of see the whole playing field. And then we'll come back through kind of a handful at a time and kind of look at them and get your feedback and get your thoughts on how things are working. So that's kind of the plan for the next time. We have, as Bill mentioned, we have until 4 if we need it. We don't have to spend that long, but I do want to get you guys to help kind of steer Colleen and myself and the rest of us at the planning team in kind of the right direction so that none of these good ideas get lost. So these are some just really big categories that just to kind of show you all and the public what kind of came in. So we had a lot on energy efficiency improvements. We had really a lot on the adoption of clean and renewable resources, primarily solar and wind. Transmission and infrastructure came up, utility operations, kind of revenues and how they kind of currently work, how they report, how transparent things are related to greenhouse gases came up. There were a couple of good ones that really honed in on training and education to support the clean energy transition. We had a couple that were really specific to nuclear and to other forms of energy. We had some things that were really about how industry can be more efficient or kind of tap into some of these things. We, again, I do want you guys to know that like carbon capture, utilization, and storage is applicable to some facilities in this industry. And so there were a handful of recommendations from that I wanted to share with this group, as well as some crossover with transportation systems and some of the carbon pricing proposals that came in also might apply to us. So that's kind of the broad categories. And when we go through them the rest of the time, we'll go into a little more detail. So to kick us off with energy efficiency, this is not always the fanciest thing for people to talk about, but it's one of the things that we can really do, and it's super important. Can make a huge difference. And so this is totally essential. And so I'm really glad to see so many things came in on this. Again, we're talking about things that can reduce your carbon footprint, but also kind of create other benefits like saving money if everything's done right. So we had a couple here. We had an energy efficiency resource standard. They're kind of, I guess, the three big categories that I saw on these. We had the standard that would be implemented by the Public Service Commission and apply to utilities so that they had to reduce energy waste over time with specific timeline and goals to reduce the sales of electricity. We had 4 or so would create or build upon existing programs to help property owners improve the efficiency of their facilities or their homes. Those are the ones I put in blue, that little blue bracket. And then we had 3 that were kind of really talking about building codes, and those are in a kind of a darker green because those, I just wanted to make you aware that the land use buildings and housing group is also going to be kind of looking closely at those because it really applies to them. And again, this is just the quick overview so you can kind of see the full landscape. So that's kind of as much detail as I'm going to go into at this stage. On the adoption of clean renewable resources, I kind of broke these into several subcategories. And so we had 25 total actions, I think, pertaining to solar and wind renewable energy that I've broken into these categories. So the majority of them call for, on this page, call for new ways to purchase renewables. A lot of these did come from industrial groups. And so they're going to be, again, some of those strategies are going to come up in the manufacturing and industry subcommittee. And then again, we have some issues related to land use planning and kind of ordinances as they go into effect. And those 2 will be also taken up by the land use buildings and housing. So we've got flexibility for the purchase of renewable resources. We've got, where do you put it and how does it get along with existing users and folks like that. Then on the next page, we saw several different calls for a renewable portfolio standard come through. So we had four calling out that policy specifically. And we saw 2 different requests for net metering, and those are just on the same page because they fit nicely on the page. So you guys can tell me how to organize those better later. Then we had several actions come in relating to incentivizing the adoption of these kinds of energy resources and for different scales of users. And we had a couple of strategy and actions come in about how to increase our ability to store power for later use come in. So one was a target and one was an incentive package. The next subcategories, last two under kind of wind and solar, one was all about offshore wind. And I would say both were pertinent to offshore wind. And so if this committee thinks there are more opportunities to explore onshore, I would just say that nothing was really called out specifically to that, but maybe some things that apply to solar also apply there. But we had two on offshore wind. One, actually on that one, I wrote my notes somewhere else. I did want to tell everybody that we have kicked off, officially set a date for the BOEM Intergovernmental Task Force on Offshore Wind. So that will be happening. It's a Gulf-wide task force that BOEM set up, at Louisiana's request, and they kind of combined other states in there. That will be on June 15th, which is coming up quickly. And then the week after that, we will be doing a larger stakeholder push to kind of bring in folks outside of government that are very interested in how this plays out. It's something Louisiana is going to be hosting. We're calling it Wind Week. It's going to be that June 21st and that whole week. So be on the lookout for that. So that is one of those things where it's going, these parallel efforts that's kind of happening alongside the task force work that I did want to give an update on. And then we had a few other things that I just kind of put together under other. One was that one that I called out earlier, promoting the local clean energy industry and growth and job growth. I think that's a really important one we'll come back to a little bit later. We had some that were kind of really general, like, electrify things so that we can decarbonize the economy and eliminate fossil fuels to the extent practically possible. And then we had a really specific one about covering the Superdome and solar panels. And so we had both the general, move away from this or towards that, and we had a specific one as well. And that's that. And I would say too, if anybody has a question, even at this broad level, please feel free to jump in and ask one. Otherwise, I'll just keep kind of moving through so we get the landscape. The next category that I put things in under had to do with infrastructure or transmission support. And so transmission was one of the major strategies that this group found lacking in some of the earliest messaging that we kind of put out around this topic. And so it's great to see that we have received 3 proposals specific to this side of the issue. And I think I moved this electric generation resource planning improvements to the right category. This is not supposed to be here anymore, but I put that under utilities. But we've got 3 for sure that deal specifically with transmission planning and infrastructure related to that. So I think that one, yeah, there it is, Simon, it's showing up. So the next big category is kind of one that I made, kind of having to do with how utilities operate, what their revenue models are, how they report out on their performance in terms of greenhouse gas emissions. And so again, we have 9 actions in total kind of under this category that either deal with, again, how they make their money or charge their ratepayers, kind of what the incentives are, the way that new facilities or new resources are either retired or added, the way that the public can access information about their carbon footprint. All these kind of came in that in this category that I created, kind of utilities and kind of how they work today.
Charles, you did a great job. That's a great way to break that out. I was wondering where that was going to show up, and I'm perfectly fine with you double counting things that I put in.
That you turned in. Great.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
All right, good.
Hey,
Thanks.
Charles, if I just real quick on one thing, and I noticed some of them, like you have Brian Bond and some of them you have members of the committee.
Yeah.
I mean, I know you're probably just putting that in generally, but each one really was submitted by an individual on the committee. So none of them, we haven't agreed on anything.
I appreciate that. I should have made that. And that was partly me going too fast through this. So sometimes I tried to generalize it, saying, oh, this person's from an organization. I didn't know if they were speaking for their organization or as a person. And so you will see me do that inconsistently throughout the entire presentation, whether it's from Jonathan or from Entergy or from Logan or from Alliance for Affordable Energy. I just apologize. Same to you, Brian. I know that's kind of, how about I fix that before I post it online afterwards? I can
yeah, no worries. I just wanted to make sure that was clear.
No, thanks for clarifying that. And then, okay, so other types of energy, we had a few that came in that are applicable to us. So that it's more, there's more to clean energy than just solar and wind. So I had 3 proposals relating to nuclear and how nuclear can be tied to support the production of an important fuel for energy, namely hydrogen. We had one on renewable natural gas, which is natural gas is produced from agricultural or waste systems. And then one on utilizing forests or forest byproducts to reduce emissions as well. Most of these will also show up in either industry, transportation, or the ag and forestry respectively, just so you know, but those are kind of another category that I brought in. And then again, kind of switching over to some that are more maybe in others committees, or we'll have a longer discussion on them. We had some that were really, I felt like were really specific to kind of industry operations. They will be taken up in detail by manufacturing sector. They were supposed to go first. We had to move their meeting to later on. But we will also come back to these in our meeting too. So we've got combined heat and power in district heating and cooling, the ways that CHP can be bought by utilities, emissions reductions and generation supply had to do with some of this, as well as doing energy audits for industrial facilities, kind of for efficiency. So it's as kind of an efficiency thing, but I've kind of put it here because it really pertained mostly to industry operations. And then the last page, I think, yes, the last page is some things that were, again, kind of more either cross-sector or more specific to other groups. So carbon capture, utilization, and storage. There were 8 total that came in. Some did come in from some of our members, so I did want to I did list those specifically, and so we can let Robbie kind of explain later on kind of the specific applications for us if they're beyond the kind of the obvious ones. We had 3 come in under transportation systems, but it is going to be important for us to kind of think about what those connections are as not just the transportation sector, but other sectors become more electrified. What do we need to provide from the electricity generation side to kind of allow for that? So we've got the expansion of alternative fuels, we've got electrification of school buses, and we've got renewable energy and sustainable aviation fuels. What that one really is about is kind of using the land that airports already have for solar generation. And then we had a couple on carbon pricing that would obviously apply to our sector as well if they went forward. So supporting a national carbon price policy, and then another one on carbon cap and trade. And I think that is the full list. Yes, Rob.
Oh, I'm sorry. I don't have my there. Okay.
There you go.
Oh, wait. I got to fix that. So my question actually had to do, oh, maybe I can't fix that. But my question had to do with the chemical and refining sectors, given that they're such a large share of our emissions. Were there any proposals that specifically involved either improving the efficiency of chemical and refining sectors or the adoption of clean renewable resources in the chemical and refining sectors? And I know you mentioned one thing having to do with efficiency, but it seemed that it was related to other things too. And so I'm just wondering if we have proposals for either of those.
Yeah, I would say the short version, I think we'll get into more details a little later. And I see Catherine thankfully raising her hand because she put in a couple. And so the short version is there are a couple of proposals on, I called it flexibility for procuring or buying. Basically, there's some power purchase agreement type categories that I think would apply to industry, just kind of getting access to renewables and cleaner sources of energy. There are a couple that had to do with combined heat and power, which are efficiency related. I think, Catherine, did you want to kind of chime in as well?
Yeah. Am I unmuted? Yeah. I was just going to say that so for LEUG, the Louisiana Energy Users Group, I think we submitted 5 proposals, and several of those certainly had to do with access to renewables, different ways to purchase renewable power, either from the utility or from a third party. So and maybe you grouped them, Charles. It looked like there were 2 of ours that weren't included. So one of them had to do with purchases. It was 170 on the spreadsheet. And then we did do another one on interruptible power, which is 118 on the spreadsheet. And by the way, there's a proceeding at the PSC on that, and there's good progress being made on a proposal. But I think it's still an important proposal because it can result in lowering the amount of capacity that the utilities have to build, and also potential for peak shaving. So it requires that industry, if there is an emergency, certainly, or if there is an economic interruption, they're required to cut back on their power consumption. And so there are benefits from that. So I don't know if that would fall under the energy efficiency grouping here. I was trying to remember the groupings, or maybe an industry focused action. Jonathan, I don't know if you have thoughts on that, but those are two, Charles, that I just didn't see, or maybe you've grouped them in with something else and I just missed it.
I didn't, the one that has a docket open, I might have missed that one. And I would just say for everybody, if I did miss one, this is the best time to kind of bring it up, but they're not lost to the planning committee. We've got this master list that we're kind of sorting online and stuff. It just got lost in translation from that list to the PowerPoint slide, I think, somehow. So
I wonder if it was on, Charles, your 6 others on that next slide coming up. But I don't know if it's so much, I mean, it would be obviously industry involved, Catherine, but at least the one that's in front of the commission stretches a bit further than just industry, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So.
Well, Catherine, can I just ask you again to kind of raise these again when we get to that specific slide? We're about to jump into the kind of each of those pages more slowly and kind of go in there. And
all right.
I had you flagged already to kind of explain some stuff. Yeah, Rob?
Can I follow up, Charles? Yeah. Because I'm still, I mean, this isn't my area, so I'm just trying to consolidate my thoughts a little bit. But one of the things I remember hearing from people who are in the chemistry and the refining sectors have said that there's some kind of a limit in reducing their emissions because of the need of more efficient technology, either in the emissions or in the chemical manufacturing plants themselves. Things like heat transfer units and things like that. And then I've also heard that there's some kind of a barrier because some of the heat that's generated for manufacturing or for refining is such that it's hard to use renewable sources to generate that kind of heat. And again, there's kind of a technology issue there. And so I guess what I'm wondering is, are there any proposals designed to attack either of those barriers? And I know in the industry in general there is, and at the EPA in general there is, but what I'm wondering is if are there any efforts, or is there any desire expressed to actually make the refining and the manufacturing plants more efficient in their use of energy, or some way of looking at the technology to see if they can replace some of their fossil fuel generated energy with renewables, not in terms of whether or not they can buy it on the market, but in terms of, even if they could buy it on the market, could they effectively use it for the processes that they need to operate? I guess that was my question, if that makes sense.
Yeah, Jonathan had one that was kind of related to your first point on kind of the technology issues. Jonathan, do you mind just kind of just giving us an overview of what that one had to do with now?
Yeah, sure. I don't mind at all. A lot, Rob, I think of that. Obviously, I think there are a lot of smart people trying to work on a lot of that all over the place. The one I added was essentially kind of just continuing to look for those advanced technologies, because we are along our path at Energy, at least, to net zero by 2050, and certainly we don't know all the ways that we'll get there, right? I mean, there are going to be technologies between now and then that'll certainly support us. We know the near term for sure, but those technologies in the power industry, and then I'm sure in the manufacturing and industrial, they're moving quick. I mean, we're talking about them almost daily now with our customers. And, I don't know how you capture that in a specific action item, other than I think people are just actively and continually looking for those best options to do that. There is certainly limitations, on the ability to start the motors of the size that these complexes have. And we see that on our side. We need machines to start machines. And so finding the best way to have those machines in the best carbon space that they can be is really the challenge moving forward.
Yeah, there's just the last thing I'll say, because I appreciate that, Jonathan. I think that's really helpful, is that it seems to me that if these technologies are moving and we're looking for them, that's a really great thing. What we're doing, it seems to me, or at least in our proposals involving CCS, which seems to be in a similar situation where we know we've got to multiply the technology times 10 or whatever it is, that some of those proposals are looking at ways to feed money into investment in that area, looking in ways to create financial incentives for people to build out that CCS technology that we don't have yet, that we need. And so I'm just looking for something maybe on the efficiency side or on the renewable side that would be comparable to that, because if we're going to spend however many millions or whatever in state financing of CCS, maybe we should also be thinking about doing that for efficiency and for renewables in those same sectors, since it is all about that sector and we want to be as robust as we can. That was the only thought that I had.
Yeah, Robert, I appreciate that. We'll definitely add that, and we can listen out for that at the manufacturing committee, because I haven't actually reviewed all the different ones that came in for them. So there could be that they have a list like that going, but it could be that they don't. So we will definitely make a note of that and see where that goes. And I do think we do have some starting points here. There was the one about just kind of energy audits of facilities, and that's not quite exactly what you mean, but just kind of understanding what's happening now and what could be improved in the future. And I think Jonathan gets us a little bit. And there's the one on kind of using nuclear power to create green hydrogen and then using that hydrogen around too. That's kind of in that space, but I don't know how close that is to being actionable.
Yeah, and Charles, I would also add, this is kind of not, in direct answer to the point made, but we're also promoting ways to make it easier to engage in CHP projects. So, certainly you're having a more efficient means of producing heat, steam, or whatever within that manufacturing process if you're using CHP. So we've kind of hit it from that angle as well.
And Catherine, if I read those correctly, right, is to the degree that some places could do more CHP if they could find somewhere extra places to send that power. That's part of it, right? They're kind of not using the full potential in-house. Right?
Correct. So what we focused on really, we focused on the ability, so behind the meter, so the utilities would not have to transport it, open it up to allow parties behind the meter. If you've got facilities, behind the meter, they could share that power. Strictly with CHP itself, we have a lot of companies who have multiple locations, and they may have CHP at only one location, but they're purchasing power from the utility at another location. So we're proposing them being able to maximize their production at that location and then have that power transported to their other location.
I got a question.
Please.
Catherine, do you know how much of our state's combined heat and power and cogeneration potential has been met by the industrial sector in Louisiana?
I don't know that off the top of my head. It seems like somebody did a study about CHP potential. I don't know if it was Center for Energy Studies or who, but it seems like there is a number out there about what the additional potential is. I'll see if I can locate that and circulate it.
Well, I think what Rob was driving at was most appropriately answered by combined heat and power. And what I like about it is that it helps our large industrial sector become more sustainable, helps keep all those jobs, and it also provides a fairly clean way to make electricity. I know the utilities don't always love it, but it is something that the task force has been asked to do. There's a guy named Tony Laska who submitted, I think, number 89 that pushes combined heat and power. And he's he's employed by the federal government to promote it. And so he ought to be considered a resource for this committee.
Yeah, Bill, I read Tony's. I mean, obviously there is a market, right? I mean, within MISO, I think what Catherine is suggesting is other things besides just the market. I mean, I think the one suggestion that there isn't a market of that I think is a little off. There is a market. I mean, I think what Catherine is suggesting is something different, and I think as we all know has been widely debated at the commission for a long time, and I think there are different gives and takes, and winners and losers in that proposal.
Yeah, it's certainly a matter that has to be vetted through the commission. So
yeah, and I think it's important enough now as we talk about going in front of the commission, and Charles and I visited a little bit, and I think we all recognize this. And I mean, I think we've all in the action items we submitted acknowledged the fact that, I don't know the percentage, but it's a large percentage of the action items that we're talking about all have to be vetted through the commission. And
totally agree with that.
You're kind of trying to think about how to frame it coming out of our work here. It's something we'll have to look at. But I know,
and guys, that was the first question I had for this kind of before we got into details. Is do we have any thoughts there? Like, so what is the best way for an entity like the task force or this committee to kind of engage with the commission? I mean, is it about do we wait until the task force has officially recommended some things and we bring those, or is it you know, I'm just trying to recognizing that's the important stakeholder moving forward as well. Any thoughts from anybody?
That's going to take time and work, and I think you're going to have to expose the commissioners and the staff to the thoughts of the task force, and let them know the direction we may or may not be heading, and let them chew on some of these suggestions a little bit. Some of them they may want to reject out of hand, but it's like anything. If you give them time to absorb some of the thoughts and proposals, you never can tell. Some of them may be adopted. So I think to the extent we communicate with the Public Service Commission, that's probably a good thing.
Yeah, I agree with that, Bill. And one thing we may want to do is, you know, because at the end of this, what is sent, whatever is given to the commission, we all recognize a lot of this is things that the commission's going to have to vet and go through their processes on. And so what format and what is sent to the commission, it may be a good idea to discuss that and get just feedback. What is their view of what would be most helpful? Maybe have that discussion with Brandon Fry and get input from them on what would be the most helpful format, or, you know, what types of things would be helpful for them to see.
yeah, I agree, Catherine. And I think the bucketing you're doing, Charles, will go a long way towards that effort. You know, because obviously with 70 or so items, it's a lot to kind of digest. And some of them, you know, might not fall at all, you know, within the commission, but the majority of them will. And so when you think about things like energy efficiency and all the sub bullets under that, you know, the commission's in its own rulemaking right now on energy efficiency. So, you know, that's a major item that they can think about, and then you have the sub kind of action under it. So I think the bucketing exercise will go a long way to achieving what I think Catherine and Bill are getting at.
I appreciate that. And can maybe Bill, you the best equipped to do this, can you just remind us of what their process is? So if there's an action now on efficiency, is that something that there should be public comment, or the governor's office should participate? Or should I bring these ideas during this thing, or what's their process to decision making?
It's like making sausage, I think. You don't really want to look at it. No, it's a lengthy process. The energy efficiency docket's been open, I think, for 10 years, maybe longer than that, and they're still struggling with it. I think before we nail down any of our proposals, we ought to expose them to the PSC. I think we might want to have a slide with perhaps a maximum of 20 action items that are most relevant to the workings of the PSC, that are spelled out in English, plain English, and large, bold typeface, and make it easy for the commissioners to absorb that in the context of like a 1.5 or 2 hour presentation at one of their monthly meetings.
Okay, so I like exposure, and then maybe formatting and packaging something for the next beginning of the formal process once they they can tell us how they can best receive it in the next
as far as their docketed proceedings, they're run by one of the staff lawyers, and they're open to all interveners, and they occasionally have technical conferences, and they got a lot of paperwork that goes back and forth between the parties. And eventually goes to the commissioners for a vote. Sometimes it goes to what they call an administrative law judge. But generally, it's a lengthy and grinded out procedure that requires you to be very attentive to all of the filings and all of the meetings and all of the proposals that are made, kind of sort of like what we're doing here, but more formalized, I think.
Go ahead, Logan. See.
I'm agreeing with absolutely everything everyone has said here. There's one element, though, that the commission has rarely seen, which is a calculation of the greenhouse gas emissions associated with the decisions that they make. And so, or the policies that and rules that are promulgated. And I think it would be incredibly helpful as we're going through this, as I think I understand that these strategies and actions are going to be put through a model to better understand both the financial impacts and greenhouse gas impacts. It would be incredibly useful to take that page that Bill is describing and really put some numbers to it and make it very clear what the impacts of some of these actions could be, and how far they could go to take Louisiana in the direction we need to go. And because those numbers are just never discussed or considered.
That's a great point. And I appreciate that too, Logan. I had not mentioned that we are working on this tool. I think it's come up before, a model. And what we're waiting on is our greenhouse gas inventory to kind of better inform the way that that model would work, that would allow us to put some greenhouse gas numbers to these different policies in there. Because I think that would be important, not just for our purposes, but as you're saying, it's going to help them see how their actions can affect the kind of carbon goals that we've set as a group. So that's really great. So this is good. I mean, I think engaging with the Public Service Commission, I think this is kind of where we're headed next. And especially once we get a little more kind of refinement and kind of grouping or kind of eliminating some of these overlaps that are in here, I think we'll be ready to do that. Looking at this entire list, is there anything else that's either missing? Do we feel like it's a pretty comprehensive list? So for what our sector really is, are there any big gaps that we can see just even from the highest level that we want to fill in so far? Well, I'm okay to, let's just go in and then and kind of take a page at a time and kind of see what's really in there, and spend some time just having a discussion there, see what happens. So I think this would be really great. So under this energy efficiency improvements, Logan, I was wondering if I'd lean on you first to kind of start off with this first one about the resource standard, the efficiency resource standard that you put in. I'm kind of thinking a little bit about just to kind of give us a sense for what it is for the public or for the folks that didn't get a chance to read through it yet. And then I'm just kind of thinking about like, does that kind of program by itself provide incentives to amplify the existing programs that are also been proposed here to enhance, efficiency of buildings or houses or whatever kind of facility it is? And then also, I'm just kind of curious how an energy efficiency resource standard works alongside a renewable portfolio standard, since there were so many of those. So just anyway, if you could just start us off with the basics of what you had in mind, and we can see how it relates to some of these other efficiency actions.
Sure. And first off, absolutely, I think you could expand your little bracket up to include that one.
Okay.
Effectively, the purpose of an energy efficiency resource standard is to say not just we need an energy efficiency program, but that there's a goal that we're driving toward, a savings goal. And so to not just say, go see what you can do, but you've got some requirements for how much we need to save and also how cost effective those programs need to be. And it's not uncommon for a state to have an energy efficiency resource standard rather than just simply, hey, we're going to do a program. Thus far in Louisiana, at the LPSC, the Quick Start programs that we have right now that certainly do need expanding as a lot of these other recommendations suggest. That is also wrapped into this docket that's been underway for an awful lot of years that would get us towards something like a resource standard or a goal. As it relates to who it could impact, it could actually benefit everyone across the board in terms of energy savings, cost savings, reduced dependence on other generations. So just thinking about reducing the energy waste and recognizing how much energy waste we have in Louisiana in every sector, in housing, in commercial and industrial. You can even think of combined heat and power as an industrial energy efficiency measure, if you want to sort of think about it in that way. But there's no doubt that we've got a lot of efficiency opportunities and very little action thus far in the state toward as much as we could save. I will say that the New Orleans City Council has had effectively a resource standard, a requirement every 3 years with specific goals for savings that was sort of tagged to a year in the past. And thus far, the utility has been really good at meeting the standard or just meeting that standard. And I think there's no reason that Louisiana couldn't have one. Again, the benefit of having an energy efficiency resource standard, if you're also going to do a renewable portfolio standard, is that if you're going for renewables, you're going for a certain percentage of your energy mix coming from renewables. And so if you can just reduce the total amount that you need by reducing the waste, you can get to the renewables goals faster if you're not wasting something that you would otherwise be generating. And so I think that's kind of some of the basics.
That's very helpful. Thank you. And again, too, so it can help kind of drive people to adopt more of these other programs. So I guess to transition from kind of that overview and kind of keeping that in mind, does anybody have any experience with the last time there was a state run, energy efficiency program? I feel like it was through DNR under the last stimulus program. And I'm just wondering if anybody was associated with that or felt like it was particularly successful in some areas or unsuccessful in some areas, that if we were to kind of ramp up some of these other efficiency programs, we should try to duplicate or avoid certain things from that. Just seeing if anybody in the group was a part of that. That's okay too. I see a few heads saying nope, don't know. I did see. So again, on that one, some of those were very similar. I think the one that had the most detail, just to draw your attention to, was the one from CSRS, and it kind of recommended, I think, similar to kind of what. So Logan, I think if I'm remembering correctly, the efficiency resource standard would kind of create an office within the PSC to kind of administer this kind of this goal meeting, making sure that people were meeting goals. And I think that the statewide program also kind of imagined an office that kind of going through to kind of not only set goals and make sure people were achieving goals, but to kind of go through and inspect, enforce, kind of do all those kinds of things.
I want to clarify.
Okay.
My recommendation was not there is a.
You broke up.
the Public Service Commission.
Oh, sorry, Logan, can you repeat that? You went blank just as you were
Sorry.
talking.
Yeah. My recommendation, I might have to turn my video off to save some bandwidth, but you'll still hear me say it, hopefully. My recommendation was not necessarily that there be an office within the Louisiana Public Service Commission, nor without the Louisiana Public Service Commission, but simply that utilities be required to reduce, or there are a lot of ways to get to it. It could either be a direction to utilities to reduce energy waste over time with specific goals in mind. There are lots of ways to get at it. There could be an independent office that manages it, and there are some states that do it that don't ask the utilities to manage those programs. And frankly, this is precisely the sort of roadblock that we're at the Louisiana Public Service Commission. I think why we haven't really moved forward and completed that docket is that there is this question about who should manage it. But I don't think that should be a reason for us not to suggest that there should be goals for savings. Personally, I don't know if anybody else has some color on that.
No, I mean, Logan, I think if I may, I think, I'm thinking about the top 5 now in the bracket. Those all kind of fall in different ways to do what you're suggesting, right? And I think all fall within what the commission's grappling with right now, right? And so if I was thinking of a major bullet, it's kind of energy efficiency program / standard with those, 5 sub bullets? And then I think the other 3 are different.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense to me, to combine this in that way. And then I'm just a little, can y'all help me out? Does it seem like there's going to be some closure on this docket? I know you've mentioned it kind of both being as a 10-year running thing and also being a current thing. So is it clear to, and maybe there's no way to know if you're not on the Public Service Commission, but is there a sense that it's coming to a conclusion soon, or does anybody know?
I'm afraid I can't answer that question. Maybe someone else on this call can.
It might be unknowable. I just was trying to gauge which it was. Was it a,
There's been as much action lately as there ever has been, I guess. But,
that's a great way to, okay. Thanks, Jonathan. And then I guess the last thing on this slide, I would just point out, a lot of these do have to do with codes, these last 3, and maybe that is much more for a different committee, but do any utilities or stakeholders or PSC, do they ever get engaged with any of the code writing committees or any of those kinds of things, or are they kind of separate?
No, that's really up to the Louisiana Standard Code Council and also the legislature to make a particular fix within the statute to allow the Code Council to update the building codes. But I am in full support of that. Okay, great. And we've got more of that type of expertise on the other committees, so I will let them kind of take that on and more things. Can I move on from this slide? Does anybody else have anything they want to add to this kind of category? Yes, Simon.
Yeah, so this kind of raises a larger question, and I think it's more rhetorical than something we're going to nail down here, where it's going to be great working more directly with the Public Service Commission on energy efficiency standards, on renewable energy, on integrated resource planning, transmission. But how are we going to plan for if that process at the Public Service Commission or the legislature falls short of where we need to be to meet the governor's carbon emission reductions? Because as folks are, I'm not involved with the energy efficiency docket, but if in 20 years we still haven't resolved that energy efficiency docket, and we're kind of hanging our hat on, well, the commission's going to handle it, that's a little concerning. So, maybe I want to think more about what are the different levers that can be pulled for all the different items. So, talking about what can be done at the governor's office, what can be done through the executive branch, at the legislature, at the Public Service Commission, at city councils, because I know in parish councils, because I know, for instance, having lived in Lafayette, a lot of the things that happen at the Public Service Commission don't affect Lafayette utility system, for instance. And similarly with some of the cooperative electric utilities in the state, where the Public Service Commission might not oversee everything that's done by those utilities. And then some of the recommendations I think I've seen Catherine and the Louisiana Energy Users Group put together on having more freedom and more competition to contract for renewable energy resources. Well, some of those things might fall outside of the jurisdiction that we're currently envisioning or the current structure of things. And so I think where I'm kind of landing is, let's not, we need to talk with the Public Service Commission, and we need to work with them to find out where they have questions, concerns, recommendations for improvement, but also at the same time, we need to find additional ways that we can get some of these things implemented to the level that need to be done in order to achieve the governor's goals.
Thanks, Simon. We've been talking with some other folks in other states, and they've all said in one form or another on different topics that you need to plan A, B, and C, and D for a lot of these different types of policies. So that's a point well taken. Well, if I could, I'm gonna move on to this next slide and kind of start talking about some of these solar and wind type options. And I would love to start with this idea of flexibility for the purchase of clean renewable resources. And Catherine, I was wondering if you would briefly talk through the couple on here that you kind of put up, because they're different takes on the same thing. I think the virtual one is kind of related to that first thing you talked about, maybe with where you're producing it somewhere, or maybe not. Maybe I have them completely wrong. But could you talk us through the tariff and then the virtual power purchase agreement?
Yeah, so actually we put, am I on mute? No, huh?
You're good.
Okay. Actually, we put up three proposals on different purchasing options. So one is a green power purchase tariff that, the utilities would just develop tariffs that would be there for, designed to serve the various customer classes. And so customers could purchase some or all of their requirements, and know that they were getting green or emission-free resources to meet their needs. And obviously the utility is going to have to judge that by how much of that power they have access to. So that's a really simple type arrangement. The virtual power purchases agreements is one which is really just a financial transaction. So if a company in Louisiana decides to enter into a virtual purchase power agreement, and they're an Entergy customer, they're still going to get their power from Entergy and pay Entergy for the power that they consume every day. But they may have a contract with a third party who has renewable or some sort of emission-free power, and they're going to agree where they're buying, a specific amount of the power to be purchased or interest in a renewable project. And they're going to agree to pay some amount for that power. Whoever's producing that power will then sell that power into the market or wherever it's going to go. And there'll be some agreement on what the split is. If the market price is above the cost that the Louisiana customer is paying for it, well, then they may make money on the deal. If it's below, then they may not make money on the deal. But it's a way to help finance, renewable or emission-free generation projects and help get more of those going. And then the third item that we proposed in this area is it was item 124 on the spreadsheet, I believe. No, that's not it. I'm sorry. Let me find which one it was. It was the, just 1 second. Oh, I think it was 170, which 170, which really just addresses allowing customers to either, purchase renewable or zero emission power from the utility or from a third party. our focus is larger customers having that ability to focus to purchase power from a third party, whether residential customers are sophisticated enough, or maybe there's aggregators that would help other customer classes. We were kind of focusing more on industrial customers. But in that event, if the customer does contract with a third party, the utility would still be involved, because the utility is going to have to, you're going to still pay the utility for transmission and all that sort of thing. So they're going to be a part of that arrangement. And then obviously, if you purchase just directly from the utility, it's more akin to that green purchase power tariff. So those are kind of the three concepts that we threw out there.
And I think kind of just to that last one of those last couple points you made, are there applications for some of these methods that do apply to kind of the residential consumer, or are these mostly for kind of larger users, do we think?
So certainly, the green purchase power tariffs, that's all classes. And I assume the virtual purchase power, I don't know, maybe Logan has a view of that. I don't know if that makes sense for an individual residential customer. Maybe if that load is aggregated somehow, that would make sense. And then for the third arrangement, which is either, again, you're purchasing from the utility or you're purchasing from a third party and then buying transmission from the utility. If you've got smaller customers who are sophisticated enough to deal with all of that, it could be for them. We were certainly focusing more on larger customers, as we just saw that as being more complex arrangements.
There is a possibility in some states, they do what's called, virtual power purchase agreements for rooftop solar. So some of the largest rooftop solar companies in the country do it via that kind of a model instead of, for example, sales or leasing. It's similar to a leasing model, but it's slightly different. So a virtual third-party power purchase agreement could certainly work for smaller customers.
And then I was thinking, oh, Simon, yeah, great. I was going to call on you anyway for the next topic, but go ahead first.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, this is kind of another example, I think, particularly under the green tariffs, where we currently have a docket open at the Public Service Commission on working on green tariffs and have been filing comments into that. But I was just going through trying to figure out when the last correspondence was on that, but I think it was maybe July last year. And it's not clear to me where we are in that process on getting that docket finished. But I think this is a really great list, Catherine, that you've worked on and put together. And it's, the bottom line for a lot of these things is just allowing the customers more freedom to engage with the market directly. And that's kind of the overarching theme that I'm seeing from some of these more specific recommendations, is how can we enable customers to make the decisions that they naturally want to make. We've got these large customers that want to buy renewable energy resources, and just the way that the market is structured right now, it's really hard for them to do that. And so how can we find ways to better enable them to make the choices that they naturally want to make right now anyway?
The flip side of that, Simon, is having the developers of those projects have a means to have a committed revenue stream that's coming in so that they can get those projects financed. So under a virtual purchase power agreement, they can sell shares or whatever of a project. They've got a contract in place, and then they can get the financing. And it's a stronger deal than if they're just selling their excess into the wholesale market, because they have more of a committed price structure likely in those contracts.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent point. And something else to add on this, because I feel like we've lost this component thus far into the discussion. Maybe it'll come up more, but the equity component of the policy solutions that we're talking about, and I know, Charles, you wanted to know if these are just for the industrials or just for the large scale commercial residents. The fact of the matter is, when we add more renewable generation to the grid, the way that the grid works is by having cheaper power go first. And so you're naturally turning off the more expensive generation because you don't need any more. You all of a sudden have new generation resources that are being added to the grid. And that what that does is that reduces wholesale power prices for everybody on the grid. And so while the industrial customers and the renewable developers are taking the risk of signing up an agreement together to buy that power more directly, by having the power on the grid, you're reducing power demand for some of those more expensive power plants. And so you're reducing overall grid costs by incorporating more renewables onto the system, even if you aren't a direct purchaser of those resources. So there is an additional value here for everybody in the state when you can align the competitive business practices of the customers, but also the willingness of folks to buy these resources directly and then put them on their own balance books.
Great. Thanks, Simon. Brian, I see your hand up.
Yeah, just real quick, they're really good concepts that need to be explored. I will say that based on our experience in Arkansas, where you have more or less virtual purchase power agreements, solar developers are coming into municipalities for the most part, not so much residential, but one of the challenges you have is when you are setting the policy is making sure that you don't have the cost shifting, because in Arkansas, the model that they have right now disproportionately impacts from an equity component or low income customers. And so a lot of the devil, as we know, is always in the detail on a program like this. And while I hear some of the feedback that's being given, that you really have to think through what is a true balanced policy on this. And because at the end of the day, someone is footing the bill in most of these cases, and it's being subsidized by others. So we need to avoid anything we do. It needs to avoid those subsidies to a significant level. That's all I wanted to say.
No, perfect. And I think that's the kind of level of detail we want to get into by September. We'll be able to kind of see, hopefully we'll be putting a finer point on some of these things and go in there. Jonathan, did you have a hand too?
Yeah, I don't know how to raise my virtual hand. I figure that out. So just a couple things I'll add. On the green tariff piece, I don't know, Simon, where that docket is. I will say, I think a lot of the utilities hearing customers on that front are moving forward on their own. We proposed one. We've been talking to customers that we're working on another. I think all of that, everybody would recognize the tariff itself, because it is proposed by utility, would go through the commission. The virtual power agreement, which is, an economic transaction that might be entered into, that Catherine was discussing, the economics of that might happen outside of the commission's purview. But the last one, and to Brian's point, and I'm just going back to, again, thinking about those 20 things that you put on a slide if you're talking to the commission, right? Choice and access, which is essentially the third one too, that Catherine outlined, I think is something that the commission has taken on several times in the past. And so that would be one certainly to put on the bullet list for their input.
And then just to shift gears slightly, I was wondering, Simon, and maybe you could kick us off kind of just thinking about this, and maybe some of the other types aren't here. So Simon, I'm asking you just kind of fill in for them, but I'm just thinking about the overlap between all this, this new power generation that we hope is clean and cheaper than the existing plants. Is there, I just feel like the issue of siting comes up. Do we have enough? Are we concerned about finding kind of the land to actually install the amount of solar we need, or that we might think is coming? Or are there any actions related to kind of paving the way for adding that kind of capacity to the system that maybe aren't showing up in one of these two things that are already on here? Kind of this idea that we need ordinances to make maybe communities feel more comfortable with having solar farms kind of move to their area, or kind of set some boundaries so that everybody's knows what's coming and is happy with kind of the way it looks and functions. And then this other idea for just kind of landowners too. I should have reviewed that landowner one more carefully, but just kind of an accountability plan for kind of all this siting.
Yeah, sure. Well, so from what I understand, renewable developers, wind developers, solar developers, energy storage developers, a lot of them, particularly the independent power producers, work directly with the landowners that they plan to lease, have lease agreements with regarding building a new solar farm or a wind farm or whatever it is. And with the renewable developers that I've talked to, they have often said how savvy the Louisiana landowners are when it comes to some of those agreements, because of the history of the oil and gas industry in Louisiana, and even things such as leasing land and leasing space for duck hunting in the fall, where the landowners know the value of the land and they want to make sure that that value is captured in the lease agreements with the developers. Even with that, where you have one-on-one interaction with the developer, with the landowner signing a lease agreement, there is still newness to these technologies. And so understandably, when folks hear about there might be a solar project opening up in our parish, folks will naturally jump on and try and find out what's going on. But we don't necessarily always have the most relevant specific information to what's going on for those specific projects in their backyard. And so I know that up in the north, so Minnesota, Wisconsin, Iowa, some of these places that have had large scale renewable development over time, folks have put together things like model ordinances to recommend that local municipalities and local parish governments could use to help kind of figure out where are the sweet spots between what the developers need to do the project, what the landowners need to protect their land and to protect their private property rights, but then also protect the larger community. And so having some of those general recommendations outlined and available so that folks can look and say, I'm concerned about decommissioning, for instance, and, I want some information about what happens after the lifespan of this facility. And that's true for any type of power plant. If there's a new natural gas plant or a new coal plant, folks want to know how long that facility is going to be around and what's going to be done to renew, to fix the land if there's anything done to it. And so having kind of those model ordinances around, that's been one thing that's been done up in the north that I'm familiar with. But a lot of times the landowners, particularly in Louisiana, are quite savvy when it comes to negotiating their own land lease agreements.
Thanks. And Dr. Chambers, I think you were one of the authors on the solar ordinance piece. Do you want to chime in?
I wanted to talk a little bit about the landowners one and the solar ordinance. Simon mentioned the importance of the model solar ordinance. It's model, not modular, but I guess it's modular too. But yes, the idea is that if we had a model solar ordinance that communities could adopt, that then they wouldn't have to reinvent the wheel every time. And if the communities like the parishes felt like a lot of work had gone into vetting this model solar ordinance so that they didn't have to redo all of the work, but they felt confident that it would address the needs of Louisiana, then I think it might go a long ways. And then on the landowner one, I've been contacted various times by quite a few landowners who are very interested in, they've been approached by solar developers, or they're interested in having solar on their land. And a lot of them view it as a way to stay in business, that having a solar farm on part of their land would allow them to continue farming on the rest of their land. And they see this as a really good economic opportunity for themselves and they want these projects to be able to go forward. And yet they see that there are all these barriers. And so I think that some of the efforts that were described in the previous flexibility for purchase of clean renewable resources, some of those alternatives there could address some of their issues with regard to that. And so anyway, that's what I think that action plan represents.
Dr. Chambers, I really appreciate you bringing that up because I think there's some debate going on now to whether the solar is kind of pushing out the farming, and you're saying it's a way to, it's another revenue stream to kind of make that farming operation more sustainable in the long term.
I have heard lots of farmers telling me that. Yes.
Yeah. Thank you. Anybody else on any concerns about just in terms of like the amount of land that we're going to be needing to kind of build out some of these? Maybe it kind of relates to the next one, but I feel like any other thoughts on this, Robbie? Yeah, thanks.
Hey, Charles. Yes. So just a word about that. Right now there's 8,000 megawatts in the queue for, I'm talking about Louisiana specific, roughly. And if you give a target number of how many solar or renewable, I'm going to focus on solar. I think that's the primary, for right now, the primary renewable source that we could deploy across Louisiana. It probably 80 to 100,000 acres. I think that aspiring developers and even aspiring utilities could find a way to gain access to that land and not inhibit other land, not unduly inhibit other land uses. I think it's there. It's roughly 2 to probably 6% of the overall project cost is in land. And so I believe the land would be able to be there to be found. I think a corresponding problem, which you're going to list on here for sure, is the amount of transmission investment that goes with making sure those can connect to the grid and, not have to undergo additional transmission upgrades. That's going to be the more significant piece of the whole puzzle for solar, is those upgrades, and figuring that out is going to be key to successfully deploying solar across Louisiana. I don't think land is going to be the inhibitor at the end of the day. By the way, I'm not telling you land is easy to go get. We've kind of going through that now, and it's not easy, but it's doable. Transmission investments is another.
Okay, well, let's come back to that one in a few slides. I appreciate that a lot. Thanks everybody. Okay, so kind of moving on to the next one that I've got, unless anybody else has anything to add on the last two. We've got four renewable portfolio standard actions come in, and we did see, like at last week, the city of New Orleans recently adopted a renewable portfolio standard, and I think Professor Verchick, this is one of the things you mentioned kind of in an op-ed earlier on in our process. Can anybody just kind of talk about, I don't know if anybody was familiar with the New Orleans one that was just adopted, kind of how that's played, what the timelines are associated with that, or just kind of anybody want to introduce this topic on behalf of the four portfolios that kind of came in? Maybe Professor Verchick, are you comfortable kind of talking about either the New Orleans model or one of these other ones?
I actually might want to defer maybe to Logan
Okay.
or someone else. The only thing that I would say, which I said in an op-ed a while back, is that every state that has a net zero commitment also has some kind of a portfolio standard. And so it seems to me that it's a really useful tool to promote that.
I think that's a good way to start. Yeah, go ahead. Whoever that was, that Bill?
I kind of see a renewable standard as sort of like energy efficiency. It ought to be in our final report. That does put me at conflict with the Public Service Commission, however. I was there when they first started talking about it back in the aughts, and the commissioners were very concerned that a renewable standard would raise electric costs. So they decided not to do it. Instead, they gave the utilities a goal to achieve. And frankly, I don't know what we accomplished with that program at all. And I don't know if any of the commissioners are now talking about a standard again. They might be. I'm a little disconnected from the commission, so I can't say. But I think Rob has a point. If you're going to be serious about climate change, you need to get serious about renewable power. Like a real smart friend of mine once said, Louisiana can be an oil and gas state, or it can be an energy state. And I think we ought to be an energy state. Wind doesn't work in the state, as far as what I've read about how much wind we have onshore, but I believe it can work offshore. And we have industries that are already in that business, working in other states. So a renewable standard, I think, makes a lot of sense for us.
Okay. Thanks, Bill. Brian, I saw your hand first.
Yeah, I would just add that, to me, maybe 15 years ago, you needed an RPS. Now, just looking at the market for our industry and looking at market prices, and you do work through your integrated resource plan, everything that we're going to generate in the future is going to come from renewables. And so you can have a standard, but in the future, you're not going to see any more coal plants. You're going to certainly see less natural gas. And so, I just right now, knowing the dynamics of where we're headed, and as a industry, probably should have done this 20 years ago. Maybe be a little further along.
Thanks, Brian. Logan, I saw you, and then Simon.
Yeah, I would love to have done this 20 years ago. But I think that doesn't mean that we don't have a reason to do it now. And that's why the Alliance worked so hard to get a renewable and clean portfolio standard in New Orleans, which I'm happy to talk a little bit about. But for these purposes, a renewable portfolio standard for the rest of the state. Bill is 100% right. Back when the commission was looking at this before, the costs were higher. Fortunately now, the costs have fallen precipitously, and it is no longer a barrier to acquiring renewables in increasing percentages. One of the good reasons to really do a standard, a goal, is that it also creates a market. It creates a mechanism that moves, that incentivizes and values renewables, and can even make specific requirements for different kinds of renewables in different ways. So, for example, the Public Service Commission could not only require a certain percentage of renewables by a date certain, it could also say, and we really want to see a percentage of this here in Louisiana, and could require a carve out, a requirement or a multiplier for that to really build that as a policy for Louisiana. But there are loads of other reasons, and I know Simon can speak to them. That we should do a portfolio standard, even with the market moving in the direction that Brian has just described, which is absolutely true. But that there's another thing that I actually don't know wound up on this list that we recommended that works with an existing rule at the public. Darn it, I'm frozen. Works within. Can you hear me?
We can hear you, but you are frozen now.
Hello.
We can hear you. I think we're gonna have to come back to Logan. Simon, can you kind of jump in, and we'll come back to her when she's unfrozen?
Yeah, sure. Well, and I just want to thank Brian for his comments on renewable pricing being very low and cost competitive as is. And as you can imagine, I agree with that. What I'm hearing is we might not need an RPS because we're going to achieve it anyway. But I think that also kind of means the opposite is true, that we may as well get an RPS because we're going to achieve it and it's not going to be too hard. I know, Bill, you mentioned you were talking about wind for a moment there. And I just want to kind of brag on Brian and SWEPCO for a moment, because they just recently released a 3,000 megawatt wind request for proposals, which, Brian, I mean, you can of course speak more to that than what I could, but That is potentially the largest wind request that I've seen anywhere in the country. And that is something to be proud of, because it's very good work. And it would certainly, if it gets fulfilled, would certainly help SWEPCO achieve whatever sort of RPS might ever get implemented. Brian, did you want to kind of crow a little bit about how good you guys are doing?
Well, we're not through the process yet. It's easy to announce something, but we truly are. You know, when you look at the direction things have gone, particularly in the Southwest Power Pool, and you look at power prices, and some would apply to MISO for sure, but wind energy has just been so cheap. And literally on any given day, 90% of the energy produced is coming from wind now. So along with that, you have your coal units that have undepreciated balances that you have to do the analysis and determine, can we still move toward renewables? And what it shows, our analysis is still saves our customers money, the ratepayers, by retiring the coal plants, not spending any additional dollars on the environmental controls that are before us, and implement, install the wind capacity, and it makes economic sense to do so. So the world has definitely changed. A lot of that has been driven by low natural gas prices, as we know, as well as the availability of the wind resources in certain parts of our territory anyway. And solar's coming on right behind it and getting cheaper every day.
Thanks, Brian. Logan, do you want to finish your thought before we go to Catherine and Rob there from earlier?
Sure.
I think I missed a whole proposal of yours that I don't want to miss because it's not on the screen.
That might have been, was that the last thing that you?
Yeah, pretty much. You were kind of trying to tell us what it was, and then you disappeared.
Okay, so sorry. So I also submitted a proposal that would amend an existing rule at the Public Service Commission. Everybody, or most everybody here, is probably familiar with the market-based mechanism rule, which currently requires some element of going to the market and finding out, what the least cost option is for a specific resource. What I recommended, and what is starting to happen more and more around the country, is rather than a market-based rule or a request for proposal rule that says that a utility can say, what is the least cost this thing, but an all-source competitive solicitation rule that says, we have a need, all comers on the market, how can we solve the need? And using that as a real economic screen to find the least cost resources. And then either adding what's called a loading order, which puts the priority resources sort of at the front of the line, and then other resources that that a regulator or legislator might not like as much or might not be priorities, can put those at the sort of back of the line. But an all-source competitive solicitation is starting to show enormous cost savings in other parts of the country. And then a loading order can prioritize then something like efficiency first, demand response second, renewables third, something like that. But that would be a kind of a different way at expanding renewables in the state.
Interesting. And Logan, I definitely read that one, and it's on our list. It did not get lost. I just did not get it onto a slide. I apologize for that. Rob, did you want to go next, and then Catherine?
Oh, sure. I'll be brief. I just wanted to comment on the idea about whether it's best to let the market bring the renewables in, or whether some kind of a plan, whether planning would be helpful. And I fall into the category of the planning would be helpful. And the reason is it's true. The market in the United States is going to deliver renewables, and there's no stopping it. And we should celebrate that. But what we find in some of the newer states that are adopting portfolio standards, like New Mexico, for instance, I mean, one of the reasons they're doing it is because they're also bringing in some other elements into the planning. So like New Mexico's project, for instance, has pieces that relate to worker transition, because the market in the United States isn't going to care so much about worker transition, but we in Louisiana care a lot about market transition. And so if there are things that we can build in to create grants or create investment or reward jobs staying in Louisiana, whatever it is, those are really good things for us to think about. And the other thing is, Logan's really right, I think, about location. I mean, the market doesn't care where wind and solar is, as long as you could provide it. But in Louisiana, we care about whether we're generating energy and whether we're having those jobs. And so not only, I would say, should we have something that rewards the creation of that power in Louisiana, but we could also develop incentives that reward the creation of renewable power production in areas that are overpolluted or that have endured a lot of burden and pollution in Louisiana. Because if you replace generating capacity there with renewables, you're abating a lot of air pollution. And so the US market doesn't care about that, but we in Louisiana care a lot about the health of our people and about the equitable distribution of environmental harms and benefits. And so I think there are lots of different things we can do distributionally with that will not only allow us to reduce our emissions, but allow us to get a lot of the other things, economic benefits and health benefits that we're interested in.
Thank you for those points. That was great. Catherine, did you want to chime in as well?
Yeah, one comment. So I imagine that LEUG was one of the parties that opposed an RPS, and when it was considered by the commission years ago, with one of their concerns probably was cost. I have not gone back to them today on what is their position on an RPS, so I'm not going to comment substantively on that. But the thought that occurred to me in thinking about this was, are we really talking about a renewable portfolio standard, or in the context of what this task force is about, a zero emission portfolio standard? And I totally understand that, that's going to be driven today predominantly by renewables, but in the context of, Jonathan's discussion about advanced energy technologies and all that sort of thing, maybe the focus is more of a zero emission portfolio standard, if that's what's going to be considered. Just comment for discussion.
Yeah, I think it's a great point. And the renewable language that I have up on here is from the proposals themselves. So that was the title they used. And so I don't think there was necessarily, anyway, that's a good point. There's the difference. Simon, did you have a thought there?
Yeah, that's a good point, Catherine. I don't recall seeing like a clean energy standard or a net zero standard, but I think probably a renewable portfolio is probably a subset within that larger standard, so that way you can ensure that you're achieving a certain percentage of renewable penetration. Because I went through and read a lot of the submissions, but I don't recall seeing what percentage renewable some of these were and by what time. But those having that sort of target percentage penetration level by a certain date is a very common thing.
Charles, I think Catherine makes a good point, and it might just be public relations to change the name of the standard. But if it gets us there, then it's a worthwhile thing. Question for her: what would be an example of an energy source that would not be renewable but would be clean?
Nuclear is the first one that comes to mind. There could be other things as well. So we've also got just a preview of some of the other slides. We've got a proposal about kind of the forest byproducts issue. How can we use those? It's definitely a renewable resource, and how close it gets to being carbon neutral kind of depends on a lot of things, how it's the whole resource is managed along the line. So there's there's other things that are renewable, but maybe aren't as clean or are clean, renewable. So the language, like Bill, I think you're right. I think there's a public relations component, but there's also a real, like, in terms of what your goals are and what you're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, or maybe green hydrogen, or you're using some of these other, these kind of alternative natural gases, these other fuels that are being classified as green. So, and I'm sure there's other things as well.
Yeah, Logan, please jump in.
Yeah, I just want to flag for us that just as we're also looking at the other intersections of other impacts, that while nuclear may be carbon pollutant free, it is not pollutant free. And neither, of course, would be biomass or a lot of other things. So we need to be very thoughtful when we say it's emissions free, what we're really saying, and who's bearing that burden.
Completely. Yes. Excellent thought. Does anybody else have any other thoughts about this goal setting? A standard setting on this and creating the need. Okay, I do want to spend a couple seconds on kind of net metering. It did come in twice, and I know that is something that there was public service action on in semi recently. I guess one of the questions is, how is, and maybe I shouldn't have put these on the same slide at all, but it did make me ask, are they related at all, one another? Like this whole idea of a market for renewables and the ability for somebody to kind of sell their power back. Is there a relationship there that needs to be considered, or is there not? Maybe It's a bad question. But I do just need to express my ignorance. Logan, do you have something to say?
I think there may be a difference of opinion for folks on the call. I think there is an opportunity for solar or other renewables that are placed behind the meter, that are net metered, to be part of getting to a renewable portfolio standard. There are a couple of ways at it, but I think they're maybe not as obvious as utility scale or even community solar. But I think all of those things that reduce the total need for generation from other sources gets us closer to a renewable portfolio.
Yeah, Charles, I think Logan, you'd agree. I don't think they're directly related, other than it could be one of the renewable options that could feed it.
Gotcha.
Just like everything else.
Sure.
And are there other benefits aside from kind of reducing that demand on the system that net metering kind of brings in, that anybody can kind of speak to?
Pretty significant. Go ahead. Sorry.
I was just going to say rooftop solar is about as democratic as you can get, small d democratic, letting people generate their own power at home. It's a hot topic with the utilities. They request, and rightly so, to be paid for the use of their lines and the backup power that they provide when the sun's not shining. But I think the decision that the commission reached, and this is another area where I'm going to be at odds with the commissioners, but the decision that they came up with, I think it was 2019 by a 3-2 vote, it heavily favored the utilities and heavily disfavored the rooftop solar users. So to me, it's sort of like a renewable standard and energy efficiency. It ought to be in the final report. And there's a lot of room where this could be a compromise between the customer and the company. And we just haven't reached that compromise yet because the companies have 3 votes. So I don't know. I mean, to me, allowing people to generate their own power is a great thing. And it's part of economic independence in this country, and it's also clean. So we ought to have some reference to net metering in the report.
Okay, thanks, Bill. I'm gonna go to Dr. Chambers first. I haven't heard from him, and then Rob, and then Brian.
The point I wanted to make about net metering is it does have a very significant effect on the solar installer industry, in the sense that in between utility scale jobs, they keep all their employees paid by doing rooftop jobs or commercial. And so if we're looking to build a permanent solar industry in Louisiana, I think that net metering would have to be part of the package to allow the rooftop solar industry to go on, so that we can actually have a skilled workforce here in Louisiana that can do our own utility scale projects. Otherwise, we're going to have to everything about the whole utility scale project almost may be brought in from out of state. All the materials and all the labor might be brought in from out of state. And it's the connection to net metering is not obvious, but I wanted to point that out.
That's exactly the kind of feedback that we needed to hear. Thank you for that. Yeah, Rob, can you go next? And then Brian?
Yeah, I just want to, first of all, just say, I think Terry's exactly right. Yeah, to get net metering is really important if we're going to be getting solar on rooftops. I just wanted to say that I think we should think a little bit about also how it's independence for households, but it's also independence for communities too, or neighborhoods. And so if we think about it in terms of community, small communities, or in terms of how we might get renters involved in trying to recoup some of the benefit of net metering, I think that would be really important. That would be a way of democratizing the control over power. And you know, I just was talking to somebody, this is just a story, but I was talking to somebody from Chicago just last week, where the Chicago Housing Authority actually was investing in some rooftop solar for subsidized rental housing, and the authority itself, the city's housing authority, was able to take advantage of incentives and net metering, and all of that money that was recouped went into the housing authority and went into the community. So you would imagine that with a household who would be able to take that money and put it to good use, but you could also imagine that for some kind of a community or a neighborhood or a housing authority would also be able to have that money and then invest it back into the community. And I think that would be a really important way of distributing the benefits of something like solar rooftop technology.
Brian.
Yeah, just real quick on this subject. I think you do need a net energy metering policy here at the state. I think that it's like a lot of these things we're talking about, and where you've seen the Louisiana evolve from having very lucrative tax credits for mostly affluent folks that had the money to go in and spend on these solar installations, and they were receiving, you know, basically one for one return on their net metering output. And at the end of the day, the commission really got it right. They ended up with paying the avoided costs for the utility to produce that incremental kilowatt hour. And so a lot of people didn't agree with that, and probably still don't agree with that. But at the end of the day, if you do it any other way, people that are low income are getting disproportionately harmed. There's no other way around it. Those fixed costs get spread. They get spread to all customer classes, and or most likely do. So just something to keep in mind. It's not that the utilities are opposed to having net energy metering or policies associated with it. We think it's got a viable way to move forward.
Brian, and if it's okay, I feel like this is a good segue to my next page anyway, and I'm just noticing the time that we need to kind of make sure we kind of hit enough topics. There were several that came in on just kind of financial incentives in general for people adopting these kind of systems. And so, and it came up, you know, Brian brought it, there was a solar tax credit. There's another proposal on solar tax credit, renewable tax incentive. I guess, let's see. I'm trying to think what my question is on this. So, I mean, I'm mostly, to the point that we haven't already been over this ground, just can we talk about how the need for an incentive is still here, even though things have changed since 10 years ago when kind of they were first kind of rolled out, and we'd like what the differences are and what the need still is, to the sense that we haven't already gone over that. Logan? Yeah, sure.
Yeah. The point that I want to make that I made in my renewable tax incentive proposal is that the need has become more and more clear for solar plus storage for resilience and safety purposes. For coming back after major storms, we know that most of the fatalities from recent storms have been from generators, from people trying to have power in their home following a storm. And so learning from those tragedies and understanding that our power system, the traditional power system, is simply too vulnerable for really regular or rather really reliable in storms and immediately following storms. We need to do something different, and distributing not only solar but solar plus storage is something that we can start to do to address that. And while the costs of solar have fallen precipitously, the cost of battery storage is beginning to do the same, it's not there yet. And the point that Brian made about the higher income folks having access to these things, that part is true. And that part remains true, especially when it's related to solar plus storage. And so for those particularly vulnerable, those who require power for health purposes and for safety, and then those in a coastal area that have a really vulnerable connection to the distribution grid, I think there's a real opportunity here for us to recommend an incentive that is both on the mitigation side and the adaptation side of climate.
Look, I'm so glad that was my second question, to make sure somebody brought in storage, because only some of these proposals kind of really explicitly called that out, and I think that is one of the bigger benefit areas there. Does anybody else have a thought on these financing programs? So then I want to stay on the storage topic for just a second longer then, because we did have a couple of things come in again about kind of setting targets. And I think Simon, maybe you and Logan both were on this one. Can you kind of talk about this whole system of storage, or how that kind of what your proposal was there?
Yeah, this is one of the ones I think Jonathan rightly pointed out that it wasn't the full committee that put this one together. I really spearheaded this one on the Louisiana energy storage target. So to think of it another way, it would be very similar to an energy efficiency resource standard or a renewable portfolio standard, but really kind of in different phases where you have some early amounts of energy storage that we'd want to see in Louisiana get built so that the utilities, the regulators can get acquainted with the technology, understand all the different bells and whistles that can go along with energy storage. Energy storage is one of those things where it's kind of like bacon, where it goes with everything. And so having some of these projects that get set up in different parts of the state for the different utilities, for the different municipalities, so that folks can get better acquainted with it, is going to be really helpful. But also having a firm set number of how much energy storage the state is going to procure over the next 5 years, over the next 10 years, so that the energy storage industry can see how serious Louisiana is as a marketplace to come to Louisiana and to do business. I think as you all know, Louisiana is different than many other states. And so developing in Louisiana is not necessarily the easiest thing. You can't always transfer what you know from Texas directly over to Louisiana. And so having Louisiana set a target of how much energy storage the state's going to procure in a certain amount of time is a good indicator of how serious the state is about getting more energy storage.
And is there currently a peer state that we should look to? I can't remember if there was a target in the proposal or if there was a reference case. How did you think about it?
Yeah, I think Virginia's been working on an energy storage target, and I think too Pennsylvania has been working on one as well. But in a state like Louisiana, where the state's actually got a very large amount of peak load, I think you could easily do a gigawatt goal for energy storage and fulfill it, and find good use for that for those resources. Ideally, you would have some sort of analysis showing what kind of the better amount for it to set that target would be. But yeah, just seeing how big of a market Louisiana actually is, I think going for a gigawatt would be a really good indicator of where the state could go.
And is this the kind of thing that can be built into? I know Logan was mentioning that when you do a renewable portfolio standard, you can be really specific about certain things. Is this a component of something like that you would do to kind of maybe for resilience purposes, or you would kind of approach them separately? Because you're kind of suggesting it, from what I'm understanding, it's kind of like a pilot situation in the beginning, but aimed at growth, but kind of testing the waters first. Is there? Yeah, they're separate, I guess is my question.
Well, I mean, if you think about it, you've got SWEPCO, CLECO, and Entergy Louisiana. If each one did 300 megawatts of energy storage, that's pretty close to a gigawatt. And then you've got Entergy New Orleans, you've got Lafayette Utility System, you've got the cooperatives in the state. I mean, so a 300 megawatt energy storage project for each of the large utilities would be, it's more than just a megawatt pilot program. It's a real utility-sized energy storage project that would interconnect with the MISO transmission market, and they'd be able to move the power around and sell the power as they see fit. It's a little different from a renewable portfolio standard in that with a renewable portfolio standard, you measure the total amount of generation that the renewable projects are putting out versus how much energy is used altogether. And energy storage can be charged from any type of resource. And so you can't really say, 10% of the renewable portfolio standard is going to come from energy storage, because that energy storage could be charged from nuclear or from hydropower, or, some other type of resource that might not be defined within that renewable portfolio standard. And that's kind of where that additional discussion of a clean energy standard or a zero emission standard might come in. And so it's just something else to put onto in the toolkit here that we might want to consider.
Thank you for that. Okay, in the interest of time, I'm gonna move us to the next piece, which is no small piece on its own. Oh, I thought I was on the last one. So we've got wind and then other things too. So I want to pick up. So I mentioned some of the announcements on the wind front. We are kind of moving forward with this from the state's point of view in a parallel track. So again, June 15th is the official kickoff of that process for offshore wind. But I did want to kind of combine one of these wind proposals really just leaned in on the economic opportunity side and the kind of the building industry and the job side. And so did the one that Dr. Chambers and a few other members were a part of. So can I just get you guys to kind of, we've talked so much about renewables. Can we just kind of talk a little bit more about the local industry component? And Dr. Chambers, you did kind of hit on this earlier, kind of with the net metering, but could you kick us off on this piece? I think it's really important.
Yeah, one of the things that I am always thinking about in all of our activities is, how is this going to actually benefit people who live in Louisiana? How is it going to help our workers here in Louisiana as we go through this transition? And I think that Louisiana workers can benefit by a transition to renewables, but I don't think it will happen automatically. I think we need to set the conditions to allow them to make the transition. And part of that involves education and training and retraining. And so I certainly think that, I'm obviously on this task force as the educational representative. And so I think there's a role that the state's universities and technical and community colleges can play in providing those training opportunities for Louisiana workers who, and for companies who want to diversify their portfolio of offerings, but need some training to be able to do that. So that's what that first bullet under other was.
And they had, if I'm remembering correctly, there's a K to 12 piece, a 2-year post-secondary and a 4-year post-secondary components, right?
Right. Yes.
Right.
That's correct.
Well, I think that's great. Does anybody else have any other thoughts on that kind of that need or meeting that need in another way? I think that was there was only kind of 1.5 proposals that came in on that, but I think it really kind of captured it pretty well. Anybody, any other thoughts from the committee?
Charles,
Yeah, Bill.
I'm not sure I'm answering your question, but I was interested to see the National Audubon Society put in a plug for offshore wind in Louisiana. I used to head up the State Audubon Council many years ago, and at the same time, Campbell at the PSC was pushing offshore wind with a company out of New Iberia that was trying to suggest we use the unused oil platforms in the Gulf of Mexico as places to put windmills. Of course, I'm sure all of y'all know that one of the arguments against wind power is that it kills birds. So when you have the Audubon Society promoting it, that tells me something.
And I think that's one of the concerns we're going to hopefully work through as we kind of go through the stakeholder outreach as we're planning it out. But the Mississippi Flyway is coming right through Louisiana, through the Gulf, across the Gulf, and so it's going to be really important. We're really thoughtful about where they get put, how they operate, what kind of protections can be put in place. But I agree that it's good that it's good to see some initial support for the idea. So I think that's a good place to start for sure. Okay, let's move on and talk about transmission a little bit. So again, I guess my first question is just to kind of get for the rest of the committee and maybe the public that's kind of been following along, is kind of a jurisdiction piece again. We talked a lot about so far this meeting about the Public Service Commission. And I know that I've had this conversation with a few of you guys in the past, but just asking for everybody's benefit, is there a role for the state, the governor, or the climate task force, or the legislature to interact with some of these regional transmission planning organizations like MISO or Southwest Power Pool? Or is that another area that's kind of like uniquely the role of the Public Service Commission? I think is my main question, kind of seeing these kind of proposals come out on this. Brian, did you raise your hand? Yeah, go please.
Yeah, I'm wondering why we'd want to inflict that pain on our policymakers having to deal with the RTOs. I'll tell you, it is a complex world, and there absolutely needs to be engagement, and there is engagement, through the regional, state committees and others, at least at SPP. I'm sure likewise in MISO. So very important. Particularly if you're going to be trying to address these seams issues, which are important for Louisiana.
Thanks, Brian. And Simon, I'm going to let you talk next. I see your hand. Robbie, how about Robbie first and then Simon, because I'll have a follow-up question as well, just kind of get started. Yeah, Robbie?
Yeah, I would just add to Brian's comment about, the regional transmission organizations driving the transmission policy and sharing in the cost, et cetera. It would be a very tall order for Louisiana acting alone to make a significant adjustment to transmission infrastructure, and notwithstanding the cost to be able to do that. So, when we're thinking about what is the ultimate goal is reducing emissions and not unduly harming any one sector or group. This is one that is going to take the most effort, probably the most investment, and to be the most complicated to reach our goals with. Although I'm not saying that we don't need to invest additional dollars in transmission. I think that will come with the addition of generation, renewable generation. I think it'll come with part and parcel to those as we go. So in other words, where do we want to spend our energy? I think this is critical, but I think you'll hit more roadblocks here than you will successful reductions here as Louisiana only.
Interesting. And then just kind of my follow-up question that I'm gonna let Simon go is I'm trying to think about kind of what the status quo looks like for these organizations. Are they not kind of trying to solve some of the same problems that we are in terms of adding on renewables or, addressing some of the big failures we've seen recently, whether it's the ice storms or whatnot? Is there a status quo world where this does need to stay kind of on the front burner, even though it might be painful, as we're saying? So Simon, I don't know if I know you have opinions.
I think in climate, when you talk about climate, I think hardening of the system is important, is a critical element, right? Making sure that probably prioritizing more distribution than you get transmission first, and then transmission second, because that's where the real expense comes. Is after major storms is typically distribution followed by transmission. So there's probably as much on the hardening side in a distribution world than there is in transmission.
Simon, I know you have thoughts on this topic. Do you want to add anything to this conversation?
Yeah, Brian and Robbie are absolutely right. Transmission planning is really complicated and difficult, but the place where and the Public Service Commission does interact directly with SPP and also with MISO, but where Louisiana as a whole can work on these transmission issues is both SPP and MISO are nonprofit organizations, and they work to find transmission solutions to encourage resiliency throughout the system, encourage economic power flows throughout the system, and to encourage renewable development. And if as nonprofit organizations, they don't think that their members want those things, they won't plan for them. And so if MISO doesn't hear from the governor's office, from the legislature, from city councils that climate change is important to them, if you don't want to talk about climate change, if renewable energy is important to you, if those organizations don't hear from state government, then they might just assume, well, it's not that important to them. And so it's really important that governors, that elected officials, that folks that care about renewable energy get in touch with MISO and provide just a simple, hey, this is something that we're interested in. We may not be the electrical engineers running ProMod and all the economic analysis behind the scenes, but we want you to prioritize these things, and we want you to figure out the way to best deliver the most amount of clean energy, low cost energy to our customers. And just to give that vocal support for things like MISO's long range transmission planning process, where MISO's trying to figure out how do we move large quantities of energy around. And the way that the transmission system was built up, starting over 100 years ago, was really based on large cities connected to large individual power plants. And we're moving to a totally different system now that really upends that, where you don't just have power flowing from a power plant to a city. Now you've got generation within the city, where you've got energy storage devices and demand response resources. So things are changing pretty quickly, and we need to let MISO know that we're aware things are changing, and we need their work on transmission to help support that change into the future. otherwise, it's just going to be very expensive to try and achieve these goals if we don't recognize that transmission has a really key component to play in all this.
Thanks. And my last question on this. Oh, and then Rob, you go instead of me, please.
Just really fast. So one of the things I'm thinking about when I think of MISO is there's a little bottleneck around Arkansas that kind of keeps the north, that kind of gums up the transition of energy because there are so many different tariffs that might be involved on the different lines if they're not within MISO. And it strikes me that we would be able to sell renewable energy in the southern region up north, and up north they would be able to sell their green energy down south if we had more of a conduit between the northern part of MISO and the southern part of MISO. And I raise this because I think this might be something that Louisiana, as well as other states, might have an interest in. So it would just not benefit Louisiana if we had a better thoroughfare, but it would benefit states up in the northern part of MISO and states in the south. That's all I wanted to say.
Yeah, and Charles, I mean, that's obviously a very large topic within the MISO stakeholder arena, and the Southern commissions are very involved. And it all comes down, Rob, to, how much does it cost, who pays for it, who benefits, right? And that's the tough nut to crack and figure out.
Great. And then my only other thought was just connecting it back to the offshore wind piece. I know that's a stakeholder group we want. The transmission is an issue that we want to tackle. And we are, it's at phase 0 of that project, but we are starting it next month. Just thinking if there are any other thoughts related to that. And I know David Gary's usually with this group. He's already on our list of people to talk to, but just seeing if there are any other thoughts about knowing that we're looking to build on offshore wind. Where it ends up, might be part of it. Maybe there's nothing else to say there other than make sure we talk to David and some other folks. Okay, great. Well, guys, we're almost out of time, and I'm just going to go. We're just going to keep plugging. I appreciate everybody that's been able to stay with us this whole time. I think we've talked about a lot of really huge topics. And I don't know how we only have 10 minutes left. I thought, well, anyway. So we have a lot of these different topics that kind of address what I put into this category of just kind of how utilities operate or how they're transparent or kind of the different revenue models. And I guess kind of looking across these, I'm just, and maybe some of the green tariffs and some of those power purchase agreements kind of fit into this category as well as other places. But I guess one of the questions I have is some of these, thinking about this kind of revenue decoupling or pay as you save, or some of these different, even the planning improvements that came through. Are these things that that have to happen statewide, or are these things that go utility by utility, or does everything pretty much fall under the jurisdiction of the Public Service Commission? Or is this really about somebody totally different, like shareholders and parent companies? So again, I guess the first question I have as with a lot of these is kind of a jurisdiction. Is this an AWP call, or is this an big Entergy, or is this a Public Service Commission? Where do these kinds of things even get directed?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's probably, it's a kind of, I guess, different enough from each other that you probably almost have to tackle them one by one. Revenue decoupling would be a rate making paradigm for each utility, approved by the commission. I think the resource planning improvements, as I recall, Simon's action item is a change or a enhancement to the LPSC's current rules. So, I mean, I think the climate rankings and climate score report, Bill, I mean, I know that's one you're high on. I think that can happen fairly easily.
And that one could be, especially if it includes also large industrial facilities, that could be actually DEQ, not just LPSC.
Yeah, it might not even be.
We should have that data. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, some of that's available on our website currently, you know, it's just kind of consolidating it and,
Packaging it and making it available.
yeah. So I know that didn't answer your question, Charles. I think these
No,
are all,
I think that's good. I'm just trying to think if there's another constituency for some of these policies, any of these policies really, that we've not really talked about, thinking mostly about kind of how the different, at least major utilities are set up. I know that, you know, there's different, anyway, just seeing if there's another constituency that we need to be thinking about. I do like the DEQ angle on this rankings and kind of report carding piece. That's really interesting. I guess another thought I'm just having as we kind of rounding out some of these this discussion is there a right combination of tools that have been discussed today, or certain ones that kind of naturally fit well with one another, which I think we've seen, but maybe some that are naturally kind of opposed from one another that might make sense, like as we're thinking about the advisory groups and when we send them out with another series of portfolios to kind of compare this one to that one. Are there some of these that kind of naturally pair up well together that could kind of go on separate tracks to kind of see different types of trade-offs? Or and I'm thinking again about kind of some of these large topics like, you know, like the standards that have come up and the anyway, just seeing if anybody had any thoughts about optimal pairings or clear divergences that we would kind of want to be aware of as we kind of set up evaluation type metrics.
Charles,
Yeah,
I think, you know, two of the items that go coupled together again, that I think have the quickest and biggest bang is the two that I think both Brian and Jonathan mentioned, the acceleration of the decommissioning of certain inefficient, older and heavier emitting generation. And then coupling that with the additions, it sort of achieves the goals that everybody is sort of looking for, right? The retirement of those allows for addition of a cleaner technology, right? And so spurring that whole concept, both of those together, is one of the quickest ways to get it. Now, look, there's a host of cost implications and other things, but I think the focus of the larger task force of being able to combine those things together, again, decommissioning of older, heavier emitting with newer, no matter on which side you're coming from, the utility side, the independent generator side, whatever, those are all things that we all agree, you know, that I think the concepts that we agree to will get the biggest bang and quickest bang for the buck. So I lean for heavily combining of those two at some point, and they can take different tracks. Actually, they can go by themselves or together, but it's going to take commission action and other action as well.
I agree, Robbie. I think you also could fold in microgrids to those other two. As you're planning for
Brian, I was going to ask you to go into more detail that, Brian, is there, I can see is the only proposal that kind of addressed that, microgrids. And I'm just wondering is it primarily a climate adaptation tool, or is it also have, does it also fit into mitigation strategies and some of these other things we've been talking about too? Could you just kind of help us understand what you're saying there?
I think it's sort of all of the above. It will help to what Logan was talking about, grid resiliency, and, you know, making sure that when we have these storms that you have certain areas that are available that are off grid, if you will, or on their own, that can be brought up to take care of basic needs, emergency response facilities, etc. So, but also, you know, taking a look at future generation planning and moving to more distributed type systems, where instead of having your large base load stations, you're, you know, putting a 25 megawatt facility in somewhere. It could be renewables, battery storage, could be natural gas, some peaking units or whatever. Although I know natural gas is probably not something that everyone on the call would agree to on that, but at the same time, they're very efficient. And when we went through Winter Storm Uri, we saw just how important it is to be able to have all sort of resources available to you. And so I think it fits into, you know, you could toss it in there with the accelerating decommissioning and adding or retiring generation and adding, and you move away from adding, at least for us, large baseload power stations. I don't know how Robbie and Jonathan, they may want to weigh in on that.
Charles, it's sort of mind-blowing to me. It's sort of mind-blowing to me to think of the two extremes we're talking about here. Microgrids are, in my way of thinking, the opposite of RTOs. But they have their place, I think, and there's going to be a lot more of them in the future. SWEPCO made an announcement just a couple of weeks ago, and Brian helped me out on this, but you're going to partner with a real estate developer to build a subdivision that is a microgrid powered with solar and I think batteries as well. And that's a pretty impressive announcement for our community here. I'm interested to see how it works.
Yeah.
Yeah, Brian, that's in Louisiana?
Yeah, that's in North Shreveport. And it'll provide, backup power in the event of storm issues. We'll have batteries that'll be able to discharge for a period of about 6 hours, where otherwise they would be without power in that subdivision. So it's sort of a very small application overall, but it's it's still an important first step in moving that direction.
Great. And guys, we have run out of time. We have too many actions for even a long meeting. So I appreciate everybody that's been sticking around. I do want to kind of skip to the end. I know some people have to leave, and I appreciate you being here and contributing today. We had a really active discussion. I am going to go to public comment and just remind you that we have another chance in September to kind of weigh in. And if you didn't get a chance to kind of go through some of those actions on that spreadsheet, maybe, and if you read one and have a thought, please send it in to me, and I'd be happy to kind of include that in our thinking as we kind of get things put up. So I just want to show, just kind of, I think again, let's see here. Yeah, just again, we're going to come back in mid-September. And then I do hope that you all will feel, invited to kind of listen in on as the climate task force, the big task force meets in June and also in July in there too. So I hope you guys participate there. If it's okay, for those that can't stay on the call, I'm going to go to the attendees who are here. I don't know if Amanda or Jennifer want to make a public comment. I can make you both able to talk. Yes, please, Amanda, please jump in.
Hi, I'm actually just realizing that my name is incorrect on Zoom, which I couldn't see. I'm Jane Patton from No Waste, Louisiana, but if that's okay for
please,
the record.
Jane, sorry. Yeah.
No, that's my fault. So I've also emailed you my comment, so I will read it now. Dear committee, I so appreciate your work in proposing and evaluating these potential actions to address climate change and reduce greenhouse gas emissions in the state of Louisiana. I hope to address here the specifics of some of the actions proposed and the discussion had here today. You've all by now heard me and many others express our concerns about the focus on carbon capture, utilization, and storage technologies in Louisiana as any kind of climate solution. At one of the earliest meetings of this task force, y'all received a presentation from the Princeton University's Net Zero America group. And what they didn't clearly tell you in that presentation is this: their CCUS plan only mitigates 15% of carbon emissions. And that plan requires infrastructure whose throughput volume would be higher than the volume of oil flowing through US distribution and refining pipelines today, a system which took us over 100 years to build. That infrastructure will be built out at public expense. Indeed, to a point made earlier about potential cost burden on ratepayers, retrofitting existing industrial sites and power generation for carbon capture and transport for storage or use would be astronomically expensive to Louisiana's people. We've already seen this play out right next door in Yazoo County, Mississippi, and that pipeline failed, resulting in a massive health crisis. It leaked CO2 into an inhabited neighborhood. And local people were seen to be foaming at the mouth and walking around like zombies. That is not a safe, clean option for mitigating climate change in Louisiana. I implore this committee to focus on truly renewable and safe power production from existing shovel-ready technology that can be deployed with as little carbon and air pollution as possible, producing as little waste as possible. Also, as a Louisiana homeowner, I am excited to see you recommend significant energy efficiency products as a solution to cut down on wasted power and energy. I want to see my neighbors put back to work getting homes up to efficiency standards. And if our industries get a subsidy to make a climate safe transition, I want the state to help me and other homeowners make that switch too. So thank you all for your work today and for your discussion. I look forward to more.
Thank you for the comment. Jennifer Mouton, do you want to make a comment as well, or you don't have to?
Can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Okay. I was just going to say that, and I know Rob, I don't think anybody's really delved into the hydroelectric part of the energy generation. I don't know. I mean, this is purely just a question of mine. It kind of popped in my head, and I'm not sure that there may be some additional sites that might be suitable. I don't know, but it wouldn't hurt to keep that in mind, that there is the hydroelectric energy as well, where we can harness some of the river power. I also kind of share Brian's concern about disproportional costs being put on disproportional sections of the population. We have to be very cognizant that whatever happens, that we don't increase their utilities to a great extent, because they're some of the ones that can afford it the least. So yeah, that's really all I had to say. Thank you for letting me speak.
Of course. Thank you for listening in today. I just checked the climate email. I don't think we have any other emailed comments today. So Jonathan or Bill, I think we can entertain a motion to adjourn. And I just again thank everybody for a really, really rich discussion today.
Before you leave, Charles, question for you.
Yes.
The next task force meeting, will it be in person or on Zoom?
I do believe it'll be in person on June 8th. That is a good point. We are expecting in person. I don't think we've officially announced a where yet, but that is the expectation.
Baton Rouge somewhere.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
I may be behind. Let's say Baton Rouge State Capitol until told otherwise, but that's where we're narrowing in on. Thanks.
Thanks, Bill. And now we'll take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Thanks, Bill. Second?
Second.
All right. Thank y'all.
Thanks, everybody. Really, thanks a lot.
Good job.